For me, it's personally hard whenever those details come up, right? Because brings back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage.
Recently, when new revelations from court documents related to Jeffrey Epstein were released, Bill Gates' name once again drew public attention in 2024 after his name appeared in several files. Gates quickly denied any wrongdoing and stated that being mentioned had damaged his reputation. The documents did not present any criminal charges against him, but they were enough to reignite questions that had fueled public debate for years. For a long time, Bill Gates avoided commenting in depth on the matter. However, what captured even greater public interest was the response from the person who had stood beside him for nearly 3 decades. Melinda French Gates. After years of silence about the fractures in their marriage, Melinda has, for the first time, revealed secrets that had been kept hidden for many years. The breaking point. The article about Bill Gates' relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. In late October 2019, an ordinary morning for Melinda French Gates changed completely when she read an investigative report published by The New York Times. The article revealed that Bill Gates had met with Jeffrey Epstein multiple times between 2011 and 2014, with at least 6 meetings documented. Melinda was stunned. The details immediately brought her back to her only encounter with Epstein in 2013 at his Manhattan townhouse. Her instincts at the time had been unmistakable. She later recalled, "I regretted it the moment I walked in. He made me extremely uncomfortable. I had nightmares afterward." It was not a vague feeling. It was the kind of warning that makes someone certain they never want to return. After that meeting, Melinda told her husband directly that she did not want him to maintain any relationship with Epstein. For her, this was a clear boundary, but that boundary did not appear to hold. When she learned the meetings had continued, she felt more than disappointment. She began to worry, not only about reputation, but about what such decisions might reveal regarding judgment and personal values. Melinda's response was swift but private. According to the Wall Street Journal, shortly after the article was published, she quietly contacted divorce lawyers. She had not made a final decision, but it was clear she was preparing for the possibility of protecting herself and her children. The broader context made the situation even more serious. Epstein had been convicted in 2008 of offenses involving minors. As a result, Bill's continued association with such a controversial figure was not something Melinda could easily overlook. Yet what hurt her most was not simply the meetings. It was the feeling that her concerns had not been heard. When a serious worry is dismissed, trust often begins to fracture, usually in quiet ways. The 2019 article was not the sole cause of the marriage's collapse, but, for Melinda, it became the moment that forced her to pause and confront reality. Sometimes, a revealed truth does not create a new problem. It simply illuminates what has long existed beneath the surface. Hidden secrets, the affair and allegations of inappropriate conduct. If the 2019 news report marked a turning point, the revelations that followed peeled back deeper layers of the marriage. For Melinda French Gates, these were no longer distant rumors. They were facts that forced her to reassess the foundation of her relationship. In late 2019, the board of Microsoft received a letter from a female engineer claiming she had previously been in a romantic relationship with Bill Gates, according to reports from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The relationship allegedly began around 2000, when Bill and Melinda had been married for only 6 years and were raising young children. The board responded quickly by hiring an independent law firm to conduct an investigation. Witnesses were interviewed, emails were reviewed. The process lasted for several months and drew serious attention inside the company. In March 2020, Bill Gates stepped down from Microsoft's board. His spokesperson stated that the decision was made so he could focus more on philanthropy and that it had been carefully considered. However, multiple reports indicated that the investigation was still underway before his departure. Bill later acknowledged the past relationship, but described it as having ended amicably. Melinda chose not to elaborate publicly. When asked about the matter during an interview on CBS Mornings, she answered briefly, "That's a question Bill needs to answer." The remark signaled a clear shift. She was no longer willing to speak on his behalf. Additional reports suggested a broader pattern of behavior that drew scrutiny. In 2006, Bill allegedly emailed a female employee inviting her to dinner, adding that if the invitation made her uncomfortable, she could pretend it never happened. Between 2007 and 2008, other emails were reportedly flagged as inappropriate for a workplace setting. Senior executives, including Brad Smith and Lisa Brumell, intervened after the concerns were raised. Similar accounts surfaced at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where Bill was said to have invited female employees to dinner during professional events. While not every invitation implied misconduct, the repeated nature of these situations added complexity to his public image. From Melinda's perspective, the issue went beyond a single affair or a handful of emails. What cut deeper was the sense that the core values of a marriage, honesty, respect, and accountability, had been weakened. In her memoir, she later admitted that she had often shrunk herself to preserve the relationship. She avoided confrontation. She worked to maintain stability for their children, and in many moments, she chose silence rather than triggering a public crisis. But silence has limits. As more information surfaced, Melinda found herself facing a difficult question. Was she protecting the marriage, or postponing a truth she would eventually have to confront? Sometimes a life changes not because of one dramatic shock, but because a person finally recognizes patterns that had been present all along, signs they may not have been ready to see before. Going deeper, the Epstein relationship and a sense of repeated betrayal. As more details emerged, Melinda French Gates began to see the situation not as a single lapse in judgment, but as a pattern that had unfolded over several years. Reports described multiple visits by Bill Gates to the Manhattan residence of Jeffrey Epstein. Some meetings reportedly stretched late into the evening, often involving long private conversations about global health initiatives and philanthropic funding. Even though Epstein had already been convicted in 2008 for offenses involving minors, for Melinda, that context mattered. The concern was not only reputational, it was moral. She later spoke with unusual clarity about her position. "I did not like that Bill was meeting with Epstein. I made that clear," despite her objections. The meetings continued for years, with some reports suggesting contact extended into 2017. Each new detail deepened her discomfort and raised harder questions about priorities and judgment within the marriage. In 2024, newly public communications added another layer to the story, according to reported messages. A Gates advisor allegedly told Epstein that Bill wanted to meet but was facing resistance from his wife, adding that Bill liked Epstein and regretted missing certain business opportunities. While the context of these communications remains debated, their tone reinforced Melinda's long-standing concern that her warnings had not carried enough weight. When Epstein died in 2019, Melinda initially believed that chapter of their lives might finally close. But weeks later, the investigative report from the New York Times brought the relationship fully into public view. What had once been private tension suddenly became global news. In her memoir, The Next Day, she described that period as reaching a boiling point. The article did not introduce a brand new problem. Instead, it confirmed fears she had struggled to articulate for years. From her perspective, the issue extended beyond Epstein himself. What unsettled her more deeply was the possibility that influence, access, and strategic connections were being prioritized over the health of their partnership. Trust, once weakened, became harder to rebuild with every new revelation. These moments led Melinda to examine her marriage with greater honesty. She began asking herself whether the man she had trusted fully was making choices aligned with the values they publicly championed. Sometimes betrayal is not defined by a single dramatic act. Sometimes it is the quiet repetition of decisions that signal where someone's true priorities lie. And for Melinda, those signals were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The crisis period. Melinda's inner collapse. By late 2019, the strain had become impossible for Melinda French Gates to ignore. She was 55 years old. Her marriage to Bill Gates had lasted more than 25 years. From the outside, her life still appeared stable, privately. However, she was entering one of the most difficult emotional periods she had ever faced. For the first time in her life, Melinda experienced what she later described as panic attacks. Her chest tightened. Breathing felt difficult. Her heart raced without warning. These episodes were unfamiliar and deeply unsettling for someone known for composure in high-pressure environments. Sleep offered little relief. She began having recurring nightmares, visions of a house collapsing, cliffs giving way, and her family standing in danger. The imagery felt symbolic. The structure she had relied on for decades no longer felt secure. During a 2022 interview on CBS Mornings, she spoke candidly about reaching her lowest point. "There were days I was literally lying on the floor, just crying, wondering, how am I going to get up? How am I going to move forward?" The contrast was striking. This was a woman who had addressed presidents, worked alongside global leaders, and guided one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. Yet, in private, she felt a loss of control she had never known before. Clarity began to form in early 2020. In February of that year, while the couple was in New Mexico, Melinda told Bill she wanted to live separately. The conversation was painful but direct. According to her later accounts, Bill was saddened by the decision, but ultimately respected her request. That moment did not end the marriage overnight. Instead, it marked the beginning of a long and deliberate transition. For more than a year, the two worked through complex details, financial arrangements, responsibilities connected to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and, most importantly, the well-being of their children. The process required patience, discretion, and constant negotiation. Behind the logistical work was a quieter transformation. Melinda was learning to imagine a life that no longer revolved around the partnership that had defined her adulthood. Major life changes rarely happen in a single dramatic step. More often, they unfold through a series of difficult choices made one day at a time. For Melinda, deciding to live separately was not just a practical move. It was an emotional turning point. It signaled that, despite the fear, the grief, and the uncertainty, she was beginning to choose a different future. The divorce decision and its financial aftermath. On May 3, 2021, Bill Gates and Melinda French Gates released a joint statement on Twitter announcing their decision to end their marriage. After 27 years together. The message was brief and carefully worded. They wrote that they no longer believed they could grow together as a couple in the next phase of life. 3 months later, on August 2, 2021, a court in Washington state finalized the divorce. There was no prolonged public legal battle. Much of the negotiation had already been handled privately. The scale of the financial separation drew immediate global attention. At the time, their combined wealth was estimated at over $130 billion. Within days of the filing, Bill transferred approximately $2.4 billion worth of stocks to Melinda. The shares included holdings in major companies such as Canadian National Railway and Coca-Cola FEMSA. The property division added another substantial layer. The couple owned real estate valued at roughly $170 million across multiple locations, including their primary residence, Xanadu 2.0, as well as homes in California and Florida. While many details remained confidential, the structured and relatively swift settlement reflected years of financial planning. One of the biggest questions following the divorce centered on the future of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The two agreed to continue working together temporarily, setting a 2-year trial period to determine whether their professional partnership could function after the marriage ended. For a time, it did. But in June 2024, Melinda announced she would step down from the foundation as part of the transition. Bill committed an additional $12.5 billion to support her independent philanthropic work. The organization later simplified its name, removing Melinda and signaling a clear structural shift. For Melinda, the departure represented more than an administrative change. It marked personal independence. In subsequent interviews, she spoke openly about the transition, saying she now felt completely free to work in the way I want. The statement reflected a broader emotional reality for the first time in decades. Her public identity was no longer tied to her former husband. Major divorces often get reduced to numbers, billions divided, assets reassigned, institutions reorganized. But behind the financial headlines was something less measurable. Melinda was stepping out from a partnership that had shaped her adult life and into a chapter defined on her own terms. The settlement closed one of the most closely watched marriages in modern business history. For Melinda, however, it was less an ending than a redefinition, a shift from shared legacy to individual direction. A new life, Melinda's journey of reinvention in the years following her divorce. Melinda French Gates began shaping a life defined less by partnership and more by personal conviction. One of the clearest reflections of that transformation came with the release of her memoir, The Next Day, which quickly became a bestseller in 2025. In the book, she traced her path from emotional pain to a renewed sense of freedom, writing candidly about the difficult decisions that ultimately reshaped her future. During an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, she summarized one of her most important lessons. I learned that a relationship has to be based on trust, and if it isn't, you have to be willing to leave. The statement was simple but direct, a reflection of clarity earned through experience. Professionally, Melinda expanded her independent work through pivotal ventures, the investment and incubation company she founded to advance social progress. She committed roughly $1 billion toward improving opportunities for women and girls, focusing on economic mobility, leadership, and education. An additional $250 million was directed toward women's health initiatives, an area she has increasingly described as underfunded despite its global impact. Her personal life also entered a new chapter. In October 2024, Melinda publicly confirmed her relationship with entrepreneur Philip Vaughn. The couple later made a high-profile appearance together at the Albee Awards in 2025, signaling a comfort with living more openly than she had in previous years. When asked about the relationship, she responded with visible warmth. "It's really wonderful. I'm very happy." Now, in her early 60s, Melinda projects an energy that many observers note feels distinctly forward-looking. Her circle of friends includes prominent figures such as Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama, and Reese Witherspoon, relationships grounded not in shared headlines, but in common advocacy and leadership. She has often emphasized that major life changes demand courage. Walking away from a long marriage, redefining her public identity, and building an independent platform required risk. Yet she has repeatedly framed change not as loss, but as the creation of new possibility. Another symbolic step in that reinvention was her decision to fully embrace the name Melinda French Gates, rather than the more familiar Mrs. Bill Gates. The shift was subtle, but meaningful. It signaled ownership of her story. Reinvention rarely happens overnight. It unfolds through deliberate choices, new commitments, and the willingness to imagine a different future. For Melinda, this chapter is not about distancing herself from the past. It is about moving forward with intention, proving that even after decades defined by one partnership, it is possible to step into a life that feels entirely your own. Conclusion. The lessons from Melinda's story. From the outside. The marriage between Melinda French Gates and Bill Gates once appeared unshakable. It represented wealth, influence, stability, and shared global impact. But behind that image, the reality was more fragile. Over time, trust eroded, doubts grew, silence became heavier. Melinda has described going from standing confidently before world leaders to lying on the floor in tears, asking herself how she would stand up again. That contrast defines the emotional depth of her journey, from outward perfection to private collapse, and eventually to independence. One of the most powerful lessons in her story is simple. It is never too late to choose yourself. After more than 25 years of marriage, she decided that honesty and trust were not optional. When those foundations weakened, she faced a painful truth rather than continuing to shrink inside the relationship. She once reflected on her lowest moments with a question: how do you get up? One day at a time? One brave choice at a time? Her decision reshaped public perception of the Gates divorce. It shifted the focus away from billions of dollars and towards something more human. The strength it takes to leave when staying no longer feels right. Melinda's story speaks to resilience, especially for women who may feel trapped by expectations, reputation, or fear of change. Reinvention is not reserved for youth. It remains possible at any stage of life. Now the question turns outward. What does her journey mean to you? Sometimes the most important transformation begins the moment someone decides they deserve something better.